Sign me up.
Here we go. Nothing bad yet, right?
Come on, be partial, be a judge.
Want to be a judge?
That's right.
How's that? Well, I want to welcome you all to the Mount Joy Area Historical Society meeting tonight. I am Linda Eberly. I am the Vice President of the Historical Society. The President is on a much deserved vacation, so she will not be here tonight, so I'm standing in her stead.
Doing very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to welcome all of our visitors. How many people here have been here tonight? This is your first time here. Wow. That's fabulous. Yay, thank you. So, how did you all hear about this? We always like to know if our advertising is working. How many Facebook? Any Facebook people? One Facebook person. Great. Okay. How about the newspaper? Merchandiser or likes your newspaper? Okay, so that seems to be a good majority. How about you got an email or something from Constant Contact? A couple. Most of our members we have. Okay. Great. Excellent. Well, thank you. We start our meetings by doing a pledge, so if everyone would stand, if you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As you came in, if you did not sign in, please try to do that as you leave. That really helps us when we apply for grants and things like that. We need to know how many people come as visitors. So it's really helpful for us for you to sign in. It's not just because we want to get your name and know who you are, which we do, but it's also for other purposes. So thank you for doing that. We have, as always, we have a membership brochure. If those of you who are not members would want to consider joining, we have some membership brochures out where you do sign in. And it really does help us to have support from our local community as members of the Historical Society. So this gives you a little bit of history about the society. Acquisitions, I think Phil Kling is our acquisitions person. He sometimes finds things of historical value on eBay, and he's going to stand and show us a couple of things that he was able to acquire.
Swim tickets, folks. Great. Managed to get 2 envelopes. And the name here is Henry Carpenter. You're probably familiar with the name. He was a well-known insurance agent in town. You may remember that Henry Carpenter, I think, had the only 16mm camera in town. So the DVDs of the videos that he took, that you see today, was taken on his 16mm camera. So we'll leave this up here for you to look at after the meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Phil. Our next meeting, we have 2 more meetings for the year. We have October and November meetings. We do not have meetings December, January, and February. We will start back up in March with our 2025 meetings. Next month, our president, Sue Hostetter, is going to be giving a presentation on all of Mount Gretna through postcards. So come and learn all you can about Mount Gretna. And she has a wonderful PowerPoint presentation. Okay. We are in the process of doing a fundraiser here at the Historical Society. We are having, as many of you who came in this way saw, we are going to be having a pork barbecue. Harvey's famous barbecue. So Harvey's from Mount Joy here is going to be providing us with barbecue. Pulled pork barbecue dinner includes a barbecue sandwich, baked beans, coleslaw, and a drink. Suggestion of $15. It's going to be at JB Hostetter's is where you will pick it up, and it is going to be Saturday, October 12th. So we have tickets here for members who have not, if you would be wanting to help us out. Don Zerfy has extra tickets that you could sell for us if you are a member. If you are not a member and you would like to buy tickets, we have those here tonight as well. Anything I missed there, Don?
No,
I
that's
did,
good.
okay,
Thank you.
all right, very good, we've got those. We are also in the middle of, we just had a meeting tonight, we're gonna be announcing, we have announced, but we're gonna be ramping up our capital campaign, and we have an edition that's going to be coming. As you can see, we have a lot of things gathered on the floor. It's not just because we're pack rats, it's because people donate a lot of things to the Historical Society. And we're running out of space. That's plain and simple. We don't have as much display space as we used to have, and we don't have as much storage space. So we're going to be looking at creating an addition to the building. So more information will be coming about that for a capital campaign. After the program, you're invited to stay around and explore the museum and also take advantage of some refreshments. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ned if he will introduce our speaker tonight.
Right. This evening our speaker is Bruce Mowday. I believe I got that right.
Close enough.
Mowday. You might remember Bruce was here in May. He gave us a presentation on Lafayette in the Brandywine and making him a national hero. That was when he's here last. Tonight he's going to talk about 3 views of Gettysburg based on, as you can see, several of his books that are here. Bruce is a resident of Chester County, and his first journalism, or his first job was as a reporter in Chester County for a Westchester newspaper. He was a sports reporter. From that time on, he's been in journalism for over 20 years.
Don't tell him.
He likes to write, and in 1997, is that right?
1997, I left newspapers.
Correct. He started a media business to actually help him continue to write through this media business. What else do I want to say here? Bruce has written a number of books, over 20 books. The subjects of some of his books are, of course, history and sports and business and true crime. I'm not quite sure what true crime is, but I'm sure.
I'll tell you about it.
Bruce is a well-known author appearing on C-SPAN, PBS, and some other organizations.
You're doing great, Ned. I can't remember them all.
Right. Now, this evening, Bruce has 3 topics, 3 subjects on the 3 views of Gettysburg. The first subject of discussion will be Pickett's Charge. Bruce has written a book, Pickett's Charge, The Untold Story. The second presentation, the second view of Gettysburg, is about the individual J. Howard Wirt. It's called J. Howard Wirt's Gettysburg. J. Howard was a abolitionist and a Union spy at Gettysburg. And the book is about the collecting of artifacts that he has undertaken. Bruce notes that he has the speaker's that Lincoln used in his Gettysburg address. The third view of Gettysburg is Emotional Gettysburg. This book is his personal views about Gettysburg and a contemporary understanding of the battle. This book is unusual in the sense that it contains 20 paintings by a well-known artist,
Carl
Kerner.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Bruce has written the descriptions for each of these 20 pictures. And many people who have read this book think that it has changed their entire view of Gettysburg based on reading that book and what Bruce has put in there. I guess that's about it, all I have to say.
Ned, you did a great job. Actually, I'm glad Ned didn't read the whole thing I sent out, because I've had people say, I say, you know, that makes me sound old, and somebody always say, you are old. Thank you for showing up tonight. This is a great crowd. Thank you for coming out. Local history, Gettysburg, everything we need to keep this alive. And you can tell the Mount Joy Historical Society is doing too. So I applaud you all for coming out. I'm glad to see some new people come out. So that's great. As Ned said, I'm going to do 3 views of Gettysburg, and we're going to put them all together. And the first thing I want to say, I think we'd all agree, or we'd all question, why do we need another book on Gettysburg? Right? When I started Tickets Charged, before I even thought about doing it, I read there was 30,000 volumes on Gettysburg. And somebody had said there's too many books on Gettysburg, and that was written in the 1880s. So I told my publisher, I'm not doing a book on Gettysburg, you know, but I go up there all the time, mainly because that has a lot of personal history for me. I had a relative who was wounded in the wheat field, so I go up there, so I have that personal connection. When I talk with students, I try to tell them, find that personal connection so you can really keep on and do the research and the history. So I go up there a lot. But also the other connection is, the reason I'm really standing here and I love history and writing and newspapers, because when I was about 12 years old, my grandmother gave me newspaper clippings from the Civil War written by my great-great-great-grandfather. So that's very much all kind of personal to me. And as I said, go up to Gettysburg a lot. Didn't plan on doing any books, but I have a problem. I don't pick the books. Actually, the publisher doesn't pick the books. The books pick me. And that's exactly what happened with Pickett's Charge. I'm standing in front of it. There it is. One day I was up there, and this map, it was actually a duplicate that was in the J. Howard Word Collection. I'll tell you about it. But I always thought that was a good representation, if you haven't been to Gettysburg, kind of how you do the line. It's from 1873 map, and it tells where all the hospitals are after the battle. But, if you know anything about Gettysburg, or if you're up there, you know about Pickett's Charge, and if you've been there, right at the stone wall where the Union soldiers stood and fought off that Confederate charge, the famous charge, the lost cause, the high water mark of the Confederacy. That's where I was one day, and I looked across that field. It's a mile, pretty open. It looks flat. It's not flat. Kind of goes down and up if you actually walk it. And I looked across that field. I thought to myself, I know why Lee had to try. Lee had to win this victory. This was really the last best chance for the Confederates to have 2 countries. And if they would have won, we might have been 2 nations. Because you got to remember, at that point, we had an unpopular president in President Lincoln. We were a month away from the draft riots. We had the Copperheads, saying enough of war, everything has to get it settled. And you had countries like France and England and Spain. They were waiting to come in on the side of the South, and they needed just a reason to do so because of commerce. They needed the cotton. They needed something else. So we were in a pretty perilous situation, and Lee knew if he could have a big victory on northern soil, that might lead to the Confederacy. So I'm standing there. I knew all that. I knew why Lee had to try. I also knew, and it's pretty clear, General Longstreet didn't want to do it. He said, no 12,000 men ever conceived can take that hill over there. Don't do it. And I know Lee pretty much had such faith in his men, said they could do it. And I knew about the 12,000 Confederates. What a grand sight that must have been. You know, coming out of that tree line back on Seminary Hill and coming across that field. And they were supported by about 150 artillery pieces, Confederate artillery pieces. You know, I knew all that. I knew the importance of the battle. And then I looked to my left. And I looked down to where the Union troops that fought off this advance. And I said to myself, what did they see? What did they feel? What did they experience during this crucial time in American history? I didn't know that much about it. I mean, I read the monuments. I knew which units were there. You know, you've seen the stone wall and the copse of trees and the 69th Pennsylvania Monument, and then the 71st and 72nd. I didn't know what did they experience. And what really gets me when I write books, really personal, because what you all do and I do, that makes history. You know, dates and times and movements, or, you know, you need that to put everything in perspective. Well, you know, what was behind it in the people? So I'm thinking, you know, these guys are telling me to write a book. I went back and looked at all the other books on Pickett's Charge, and I don't think there's been any others like mine. And they were all written from the Southern perspective. Who was there? What happened? What went wrong? And most importantly, who to blame? The North sometimes got a little bit, sometimes they got a chapter, sometimes they didn't get anything at all. And I think these guys are telling me we deserve a book, write a book. So that's how my first book came about. And I called the publisher, they agreed, and that started my research. Usually it'll take 3 or 4 years, get an idea, get it approved, do the research, do the writing, do the draft, do the 14th draft. That's when I've always had it. Working with a publisher, and they get it printed and designed, and out it comes. Then the fun part comes. You know what the fun part is? Me coming up trying to, you know, to explain why this is important, why, you know, I felt like I had to do it. So this is the fun part for me when I get to talk with everybody. So I'm on my way, and I do my own research, and I can't tell you the number of days I was in the research library at the National Park Visitor Center. You know, it's a nice new visitor center, even though I think it's now gotten a little older. But, you know, it is. I always think of the new visitors, but I think it's been there 20 years. I told you I was getting old. So I like the old one. I like the old electric map. That's another story. That's a book. When I used to go to the electric map, and if you hadn't been there, it was the old time. You know, it's a field. They had lights that lit up, and you know, I remember the voice of the narrator, and I loved it. I used to go in there, and every time it cost a whole lot to get in, and everybody jumped in and went to the seats right in front of the, you know, when you come in the entrance. Not me. I went to the far side and sat down in the corner because I knew where the lights came up. It was much easier to see it from the far side. So that was part of my kind of background on doing it. So I spent a lot of time at the research library. Mr. Hessler was the librarian and lead historian for Gettysburg National Park. We became fairly good, you know, he knew me because I was there a lot and I had to call ahead of time, make sure they could accommodate me. And I'd get there right at 9 o'clock and I'd go right through the closing because that was a couple-hour drive up and back. So I want to make good use of my time. So I'd write, and sometimes I stopped for lunch, other times I just go through. When you're there, there's some documents you can take photographs of, there's some you're not allowed. So I'm kind of immersed in everything I could get. I had pretty much a list. I knew what units I want to talk about, I knew some historical papers. I had it pretty well organized, and John knew it too. And every once in a while I'd come out and say, you forgot one. I knew I was finished researching there when he came out and said, you've seen everything we have on page. And I didn't stop the research. I still had research to do in New York and Philadelphia and other places, but that was the bulk of it. And as I said, I like people stories. And I like to start my books with something that will catch the reader's eyes. And really kind of get you into it, and back it up a little bit, explain it, and keep it going. Like the Richie Ashburn book, I can see in the audience. My friend Jim Donahue. And Jim, when he met Richie Ashburn, kind of starts the book. But that's what I like to do. And there was one day I was in there, I was taking notes, I was doing all this, and then on my way home, I was coming up the turnpike, I got to 3 Mile Island, I could see it to my right. I kind of hit myself in the head and I said, you had the beginning of the book about 11 o'clock today. And it took me a while to kind of process as I was driving. And what it was, General Webb, who was in charge of the Philadelphia Regiment, 71st, 72nd, 69th, and the 116th, they were there and also on Pope's Hill. You got to focus in on Webb, and that's who I kind of focused on, the Philadelphia Regiment and Webb. Webb was a West Point graduate. Grandfather fought with George Washington. Patriot. He was known for discipline and being a really good officer. And he had just taken over the head of the regiment when Meade took over the army from, after Hooker got, had his problems with the president, so he came in at the same time, just a couple days before the battle. So during Pickett's charge, that afternoon of July 3, 1863, he has his men lined up right there at the angle and to the copse of trees, and he has his artillery battles there. Cushing was his main artillerist. Cushing later was given a Congressional Medal of Honor by President Obama. Should have come a lot before that. But he was there in that line. The line gets breached. And part of it was during the heavy cannonading, which I'll get to, Cushing was wounded. He lost a couple of his artillery pieces. And there was a gap in that line. And Cushing said, I can hold it. I still have a couple of pieces. I'm here. I'm okay. We'll hold it. Webb was thinking about moving the 72nd, which is pretty much where Hancock Avenue is in back of the wall, up to fill the gap, but he didn't. The charge comes. General Armistead. And if you saw the movie Gettysburg, how many have seen it more than 10 times? Yeah, a lot of people. Actually, I was at a book signing yesterday, and I bet you that movie came up a half dozen times. And I was at I was at a signing at Brandywine with the Revolutionary War, and that movie kept coming up. Well, if you remember Armistead, takes his hat, puts it on the sword, follow me, boys, and he gets across the wall, then he's shot. And he dies the next day at one of the Union hospitals. Good friends Hancock was wounded just a little ago. So if you remember that point, that's where I really start the book. Because what I found that day as I was driving home was a letter from Webb to his wife. And I just thought, this really captures the emotion and the people of the time, the patriotism, and what this all meant. He's told his wife the next day that when Armistead came across that wall, I just wanted somebody to shoot me. I wanted to die. He thought he lost a battle in the country. I thought, man, it doesn't get any better than that. That explains it. So that's how I started. Then I go back into it. But again, it was the emotion. Why did all these soldiers do this? Yesterday during some of the discussions, what bravery it must have been to come out of those woods across that mile. I mean, on both sides, it was really amazing. I did a little research into, of course, Webb. He ended up after the war in New York City College. He was president for a number of years. His father was in the Lincoln administration, and he was an ambassador. So the family really had those groundings in American history. When he was elevated to the regimental lead, they were looking for me, an officer with some discipline. Because the Philadelphia Brigade was good fighters, just a little undisciplined. A little tardy on their marches, little AWOLs, coming back, and they needed somebody that really could get them in shape. And there was Webb. So Webb's there. He starts getting them into shape. First thing he did was, of course, upset all of his officers. At first I thought, man, they're right, he's wrong. But he went to each one of them, and most of them didn't have their insignia because they were afraid of the Southern sharpshooters shooting them. Sounds okay. Webb said, put them all back on. Said, if you have them off, sharpshooters might not know who you are, but neither will the men, and when you give your orders, they won't obey you, then they were in big trouble. Put them back on. So he did that. When they were called up to go to Gettysburg, he got them all in line, they started up, and usually, like I said, they were a little slow sometimes on the march. They came to one of the rivers, and they usually stopped, took off their shoes and socks, walked across, and put them on, which takes some time. If you got a couple thousand men. So he said, don't take off your shoes, right through the water. Now, he wanted to lead by example, so he goes into the middle and stands there as a man. So he's an example, right? Except everybody noticed he had on riding boots. His feet When they get to Gettysburg, it's right at the end of the first day's battle. And here's the Pennsylvania regiment gets there. And what news do they get? John Reynolds, the beloved general from Pennsylvania, died, first general to die, on the morning of July 1. Didn't put him in, of course, great frame of minds. In the morning, they camped around a little round top. Morning of July 2, they put him into line where they would be the next day also. And again, back to that battle map, the old, with the lights. I remember that guy talking about the fishhook defense that started up on Little Round Top, came around and bent back to Colts Hill, and where it kind of bent that hook, that's where the Philadelphia Brigade was. Important section. So they moved there, got there that day, lined all up, they were ready. Most of severe fighting. That's the afternoon my relatives got wounded in the wheat field. You had the peach orchard, you had Little Round Top. I mean, you had a lot of things. You had General Sickles either saving the army or almost destroying it, because he took part of his men, right, and moved it up a little bit further out of that line, which led to a gap, which led to Longstreet trying to penetrate it and slipping the whole army in half. And they almost did that. Meade said, what are you doing? And, there was a big argument with Meade and Sickles after the war. Sickles actually did receive a severe wound. He lost his leg during that engagement. But he didn't really lose it, did he? He took it back to Washington, and he used to visit it when he was in Congress. It's in the medical. I like Sickles' stories. He's not, he's not a great guy. Personal. He was the first one to use the temporary insanity defense. He shot his wife's lover in Washington before the war. and he was related to Francis Scott Key. I mean, just stuff goes on. He was Tammany Hall. He was a politician. He was a political general. But he was responsible for a lot for making the Gettysburg battlefield what it is today, because he worked in making it a national park. So we had all that going on, and where's our Philadelphia Brigade? They're up there doing what they're supposed to. Late in the afternoon, when the Confederate forces forced their way up into the area where our Pennsylvania guys were, and they charged and they fought them off, and it was a retreat. And the captain of the 72nd Pennsylvania, Captain Smith, said, "Let's go, boys. We're going to chase them all the way back to their line." And he started, and Webb said, "No, you're not. Did you see what happened when Sickles broke the line? I almost got beat. Get back here." So Smith brought him back, but they did something really important that day. They picked up the rifles that were lost by the Confederates and any of the wounded Union soldiers. And when that charge happened the next day, a lot of them had 3, 4 rifles loaded and ready. So they didn't have to take time to reload rifles. Very important. Later that night, Penn Smith was, and some of his people went to Culp's Hill, mix up of orders, they got an ambush, they came back. There was a court martial over it, but Penn Smith found that he did fine because the orders were as they said they were, and his men were in danger. So we got the end of the second day. The South almost won on the first day. They had the Union on the run through the town. They were forming up on Cemetery Hill. Culp's Hill was very important because that was the right flank of the line. And Lee, a gentleman officer to a fault, told one of his generals, "Take that hill if practical." He should have said, "Take that hill right now, no question." And some people said that the Confederate division was the Stonewall Jackson's old one. And they were saying, if Stonewall's there, he wouldn't need orders. And if that would have happened, the whole defense by the Union would not have happened there and have been further down south. But it didn't, so they got strength in the line. Second day, Sickles' mistake almost really caused a major, little round top from the movie Gettysburg, you'll know, almost was Confederate victory. So Lee's sitting there, I need the victory. I've almost won it 2 days in a row. The first day on the north flank, or the north flank of the Union. Second one on the second flank of the Union. I think their middle might be vulnerable. That's what we're going to do. A lot of people say that the charge was just a suicide mission. But it wasn't quite as Lee drew it up. Early in the morning, 3 things were supposed to happen. Another attack on Culp's Hill, attack by Pickett, and Jeb Stuart, the wandering Confederate officer, really doing his orders, but had lost contact. He was back, and he was supposed to come in back of the Union forces. So if he had 3 attacks at once, they might have broken that line. As I'll tell you later, that didn't happen. On the north side, there was a meeting of the generals in a little farmhouse. It was Meade's headquarters. The widow Leicester owned the little farmhouse. It wasn't very big, and there's a couple reports of officers there, and they're talking about what took place. And Meade, again, is a general, just kind of new to command, and he wanted to know what his officers felt about what was going on. Should we stay? Should we fight? Should we go? Remember, this Union Army has had a history of not sticking and fighting. Now, Meade didn't care what they said, because he already wired back to D.C., we're staying and fighting. We did pretty good the first 2 days. But he wanted to see what his generals said. And every one of them said, stay and fight. The one issue they had was how long should they stay there if Lee didn't attack, before they attacked? Should be an hour, should be a day, should be 2 days. And there was a little disagreement there, but everybody said, we're there, we're gonna stay, we're gonna fight. So that's how, and some forces were moved along to reinforce the center, because Meade said, you know, that next one might come right at it. 3rd of July, last day of the battle. Attack on Culp's Hill goes off as planned, and as with previous days, defeated, they're out of there. They didn't make it. Jeb Stuart and the rest of the Confederate cavalry is trying to get to the back of the Meade's army, and he's stopped by the whole cavalry of the North, but including a young general with curly hair, a guy named Custer. Custer was there too. In fact, from what I read, and I didn't really study that part of the battle, the day before there was a cavalry incident, and Custer was knocked from his horse, and one of his people saved him. So, you know, there's a lot of history, all those 3 days. That's why we keep getting books, because there's so many things and people and aspects that come up with it. So later in the morning, the people from the Philadelphia Brigade, and I got a lot of this from, you know, letters and diaries and a court case I'll tell you about later, descriptions. And basically the Philadelphia people were saying, I wonder what they're doing back in Philadelphia. And they're thinking about, you know, having breakfast or lunch or what family's doing. It was all pretty quiet. A staff officer of General Gibbons' staff said, you know, the general hasn't eaten yet, and I found a scrawny stewing chicken. So they made lunch for the general. And about 1 o'clock, all was quiet. Someone said we'd take a nap. And that's when the first artillery barrage hit. And the second, and within a minute, those 150 artillery pieces were opening up on that Union line. And this was what those other books didn't tell you. You know, the Union couldn't go anyplace. And they had to stay right there. Webb said, get up, get under trees, get behind the walls, no retreating. And they had something called a deadline. When I was a newspaper reporter, that means if you missed your deadline, the editor would bash in your head. In the Civil War, it meant somebody's going to shoot you if you try to go past that deadline. So they were hanging there. And luckily, most of the charges on the Confederate shells, just a little too long. They carried over. They weren't well made. Not as much destruction as the Confederates wanted. Not that all the Union men escaped, because they didn't, because there was casualties within Webb's regiment. Cushing was wounded. He lost a couple of his artillery pieces there, and it was just chaos. The Union artillery, General Hunt was firing back, but then he stopped. Hunt stopped, and caused a outburst from Hancock, who really had in charge of that line, but Hunt was in charge of the artillery. And Hancock said, resume firing. Hunt said no. Hunt knew a charge was coming. He wanted to switch shells, conserve ammunition, get ready for what's coming next. Hancock said, may be true, but if you stop defending our men, they're going to be demoralized, and when that charge comes, they're not going to have the fight now. Keep firing. So it ended up, some people stopped, some people kept firing, and that was an argument that lasted long after the Civil War. But about 3 o'clock, it stops. They look out, Union troops, and they can see those 12,000 men coming out of that tree line, coming towards them. And you can imagine what sight it was. And they described it in their letters. And they got down to the rail fence near Taneytown Road, and the Union artillery was taking them apart, but they kept coming. When they got to that fence post, they were within good rifle range of Smith and the rest of the regiments there, and they started cutting them down. Most of them never even got close to the wall, except for Armistead. You remember who they had on this? Oh, by the way, when we get to the next one, I had his stars in my hand from this uniform. They're part of the J. Howard Work Collection. Talk about when I do this, the hair goes up on the end because of these historic artifacts that close to me. They get through, they're pushed back. The Philadelphia Brigade, and Delaware, and New Jersey, and New York, I mean, there's a lot of them who went up and helped with the repulse. And a lot of them went to the wall and said, remember Fredericksburg, and just, Fredericksburg, because that's where the Union got really decimated in a charge up for St. Mary's Heights at Fredericksburg. So there's a lot of drama there. Tell you a couple stories, and I'll move on to the next one. I'm a newspaper reporter, so I can see this happening. A couple days after the battle, some newspaper reporters came in, wanting to interview the Union soldiers that won this great victory. And they started writing pieces saying, we don't know why they're so angry. They kept yelling at each other. Well, you knew why they yelled at each other. They were still dead from the cannonade. They couldn't hear for days and weeks. That's just newspaper reports. The second one, when my book came out, I was there during the 150th of 2013, and actually I was on Pennsylvania Cable Network live, talking about my book and another author. I had my back to where the charge was coming. After from my shoulder, it was like 10,000 people coming at me. It was some sight. And I did some signings, and I was up there a little bit earlier and talked with people a couple days before that, and I was told the story that there was a big rainstorm, thunderstorm, and one of the monuments was blown off the top of it. 72nd, Pennsylvania. Told you about the court case. Originally, the 72nd monument was supposed to be back near Hancock Avenue. But they argued, they said that was demeaning to them. They deserved to be at that stone wall. So it went to court, which was good for me because I found transcripts. So I had officers and soldiers saying, well, we were here at this point and we saw this happening, and the soldiers, so it was good for me. So finally, the courts decided they deserved to be at the stone wall. So you have the 71st, 69th in front of the tops of trees, 72nd to one in the middle. And on top of it is a soldier with his gun using it as a club. It's very distinctive. Well, that storm knocked that soldier right off the pedestal right before the 150th. And I can't tell you how many people told me, see, it should have been back there. But it just bravery on each. Wait a minute, you have a Fort Delaware article? Good for you. A collector. they stopped printing them. Thank you. It's the bravery on everybody's part. Now, I told you books always have a strange tale how they get done. And when I was writing and finished up the manuscript, I went into the Coatesville flower shop. Great place to get history, right? A friend of mine ran it. I went to school with it, and he sold some of my Coatesville-related books. He asked me what I was doing. I told him, and he said, "Have you talked to my wife's cousin?" I said, "Who's your wife's cousin?" And it was Craig Cava, the curator of the J. Howard Work Collection. What a great introduction. So I called Craig. Craig's very protective of the whole collection. It's a couple thousand pieces, amazing things, including the podium that we can use in the Gettysburg Address, and the stuff from Armistead's, stars from Armistead's uniform. So I met him. He said, "Well, if you're a friend of the family, I'll photograph some of his images for Pickett's Charge." Went out. He loved the book, and he came up to me and he said, I've always wanted to do a book on the word family and the word collection. Would you do it? How many nanoseconds did that take for you to say you imagine? You just couldn't pass up something like that. And I really got into work as a person, and his family lived right in Gettysburg, right outside of that. His father was on council with Thaddeus Stevens. Stevens lived in Gettysburg before he went to Lancaster. You know, and J. Howard knew them. Of course, very big abolitionists, all of them. He tells tales of helping some slaves escape as a young boy. And then when he was in college, at Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg, he talks about some of his schoolmates renting a place uptown. And can you imagine back then, the guys were rowdy then too? People were complaining about it. One day, one of them came in with an escaped slave. And he said, I found him in town, slave captures always got him, we gotta help him. And that started a little bit of the underground there at the college. They took him out to McAllister's Mill, which is close where J. Howard lived. It's close to Culp's Hill. They hid him out. They used, at Culp's Hill, there's a big tower where you can go out and look. If you come off the tower and go a little bit northeast and go down the hill, you'll find these two pretty big rocks with a slit in the middle. That's where they used to hide the slaves, or that's what Carl told me from his Craig from his research. That's where they put them. So, you know, I'm getting more of that. As it was rolling through June, Thaddeus Stevens told J. Howard, you have the makings of being a fine officer. I think you ought to do an African-American division. Sent him an introduction to D.C. He was down there, and they had a pass. Looked like he was going to do it. He put it in his hat, and Gettysburg campaign starts. J. Howard comes back to Gettysburg to help with his hometown. He gets there a day or so before the fighting, reports to one of the Union officers, who said, we need information on where the Confederates are and where they're going. He volunteered, dressed up as a farmer, took a one-eyed horse in a wagon, and set off. And he found the Confederates, and the Confederates found him. In the troops was a former classmate of his from college. He is an abolitionist. So they put him in custody. And luckily, if they would looked under his hat, he's dead. And the note, I think, this is J. Howard on the front. And the note's here someplace. I think it's might be there. J. Howard escapes as Lee calls back all the Confederate troops to Gettysburg. J. Howard makes his way back, and for the next 2 days really just spends his time moving Union troops and helping get him to the right place and talking with the Union generals, and they congregated at his house because his dad had the best maps of town there and really helped win the battle. The whole family, they're like the original hoarders. They collected everything from the American Revolution to 1812, the Civil War. After the battle, J. Howard rode around the battlefield and collected. And he was really good at finding things and marking where he got them, and the provenance is really good. And you could tell where he was at times. Some other people went on a ride that learned about the same thing. And so, he started getting all this. He didn't keep any usable military material because you had to get that. If the found a rifle that worked, he went back. But if you found a broken sword, you could keep it. So that kind of started the Civil War going. I had a sinus problem came up on me this morning. So forget a break, that's what I want to take a little sip of water. We're about halfway through the talk. Unless you want to make it a long version. So he eventually joined a Pennsylvania regiment throughout the war. Later on, he was involved with a lot of the early reunions, wrote the history, school teacher both in Adams County and in Harrisburg, wrote for some of the newspapers. Great place to do research on him and what was going on. Just wonderful. But also what helped with the collection was his connections. If you remember the movie Lincoln, and Thaddeus Stevens was in there towards the end, and Stevens was walking around with a cane. I had the real one in my hand. It's part of this collection. And so it was just great getting access to all these, learning the history. We contacted Schiffer Publishing. I've done another book with them. And they do wonderful photography and reproduction. So they agreed to do the book. I wrote the copy. Craig and I tried to do the photographs. Didn't work. Not up to their standards, which was fun, which was good. So Craig brought in all the artifacts. Their studio was on the second floor. They had this kind of crane thing. Craig would take them out of his van, put it on, and up they would go. I'm thinking, it's going to fall at some point. But it never did. He gets them in. We get them all shot. And the result is the J. Howard workbook. It's just an amazing collection. After it came out, Pennsylvania Cable Network, and I've been on it probably 7 or 8 times, but they wanted to do a book on the collection. So we shot it at Craig's house, and Craig brought out some of the artifacts to do it. And I started out with the podium standing behind it, 7 years ago. And, went through all of them. And I said, Craig, why don't you do it? And he said, I don't want to do it. So that morning at his house, he hadn't shaved, he had on his old clothes. He was not going to be anywhere near that camera, but certainly helped out staging everything. So that turned out to be a really good book. There was one saddle that I really wanted to see and touch. General Barlow's saddle. Barlow's knoll where he was wounded. And I had to see it and touch it because he was the general that commanded my relatives early in the war. I said, I know they saw it. I wonder if they got to touch it like I did. And it's just, again, all these personal connections with it. So now I have 2. I'm finished, right? Carl Kerner, and we've since done one on Brandywine also. Carl Kerner is the only artist personally taught by Andy Wyeth and Wyeth's sister Caroline. If you know the Wyeths, and if you have a spare $2 or $3 million in your pocket, you can get one of his originals. Or more, they may be more now. And Wyeth is heavily collected, very famous. Carl lived next to the Wyeths. Now his farm is part of the Brandywine River Museum, the Kerner Farm. His relatives were in a lot of the paintings. Some of the early paintings with a German soldier in the German helmet is Carl's grandfather. So there's a great connection there. Carl and I were at Gettysburg once, just taking a tour, and a few years later he said, let's go back and you show me things that mean something to me, like the wheat field and some of the others. So I did. And Carl, as most artists are, they're great. I look, artists are very creative, but sometimes they don't tell you everything they really had in mind. And his idea was he was going to do paintings, and he did 20 for Gettysburg, I think 22 for Brandywine. And he wanted me to do the essay on what happened there in the history, but also the reasons why he picked those different paintings and why it was emotional for him. It was Carl's title, Emotional, because he needs to paint if there's an emotional attachment to their scene. He didn't want to do monuments, and he didn't want to do reenactors. There's one reenactor in there, and there is parts of one monument, the New York monument up on Little Round Top. Actually, I think that's one of the better paintings in there. But it's not your typical Pickett's charge book. You know, it's not here, you know, the unit, and this is what happened. This is, you know, information on the wheat field, and information on Tilly Pierce's house, and the witness tree that Lincoln went past on his way to the Lincoln address, Gettysburg address. So, you know, we had a chance to put in our emotions, why it meant something, and he, you know, painted the scenes, and like I say, he's a great painter. One of the first trips when we went out there, just to give an example, we went to the end of Pickett's Charge. And it was a rainy day, a little bit cool, it was in the spring. I loved it because I didn't have any talks to do. I could actually just kind of wander around and be a tourist, which it usually doesn't happen. So we were up, and we were there, and we were at the area where Lee met his surviving troops. Very emotional time. And on the way back in the car, we were just talking. Said, well, what, out of all of our stops, what impressed you the most? What struck you the most? And he said that stop now did it for me too, but for different reasons. Carl said I could almost sense the anger of those surviving Confederates. A needless charge. They lost so many of their brothers, sons, you know, men they knew, neighbors. They just angry. I said, yeah, I had a different take. And I thought it must have been one of the saddest days of the whole war for Lee. Here's Lee, who has always trusted his men. They've always come through to him, no matter what the odds. And he was convinced they were going to come through for him today. And they didn't. For a lot of reasons. A lot of, just things didn't happen that should have with the Confederate Army. So we had conflicting kind of ideas from just kind of standing there at the rail line. So that's kind of what we did all the way through the book. He loved Tilly Pierce's story. The young woman who lived in town, and her parents wanted to help her, and they sent her out to Little Round Top for the battle, which of course was one of the bloodiest areas to be. So he got into that, and the bridge that the Union came on and the Confederates retreated. He did a great painting of that. A wheat field, sown, a peach orchard, the one on Little Round Top. Carl really gets into it, and it's really a pleasure to work with him. Then Carl lives on the battlefield of Brandywine. Now, we were sitting in his house on the Brandywine. We've done I think the publisher did 2 printings of it. We said, what are we going to do? Another Gettysburg book? We had talked about Antietam, and we just both kind of looked at each other and said, where are we sitting? Right here on the battlefield? You live here? I used to be the president of the Brandywine Battlefield Park as friends of Brandywine Park. I said, why don't we do Brandywine? So that's why we came up and we did Emotional Brandywine. I really love that cover. You can come up and take a look at it. And again, it's a lone soldier out in one of the areas of the final part of the Battle of Brandywine. But it is so emotional. I try to get what people think and what it means to different people, because like I said, what you do and I do really makes the history, and it makes it come alive. How are we doing on time there, Nick?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock! Oh my goodness, wait.
The clock hasn't struck yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I want a sip of water, and then I'll take a question. That was a pretty good time. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
In your opinion,
Yes.
how accurate are most of the battlefield tour employees?
Yeah, the state park. Well, you have the how accurate are some of the tours and information from the different guides. The National Park Service Rangers, they do a ton of research, and you'll see them when they come out with their notes and everything, and I've talked to them. So I think they're really, really accurate, or at least, you know, they base on information they received in their research. Most of the others that are battlefield trained, I wouldn't want to take that test because there's just so much information. And some of them, I was on one recently, and it wasn't a National Park Service, but it was one of the battlefield trained. And he was pretty good, but you know, he was trying to be personable, which was fine, and he was trying to make some jokes. I had my grandson with me. I said, no, that didn't happen. So sometimes it's got to be, yeah, and they don't realize, I think they're just trying to get the group and have a good time, which I never do that. But that's what they were doing. But mostly they're all very good. Yeah. Oh no! Yes.
Can you address two groups of people who are seldom addressed in these kinds of forums? And those are two groups of black people. That is the enslaved people that came as camp servants for the Confederates,
Right.
and the free black people who were stolen from Pennsylvania
Right.
by the Confederates.
Right. Well, you had the Fugitive Slave Act where the federal government allowed the slave owners to come up with their hunters to take them back, which didn't help. They, you know, some of the enslaved black were offered freedom. And I think the soldiers, you know, basically the officers had to trust them a little bit to get them that far north without escaping. And you saw the animosity as soon as the North started getting colored regiments to fight, that, you know, the slaves were putting their lives on the line to go back in to fight the Confederates. In Gettysburg, right before the battle, a lot of the free blacks took off. They didn't want anything to do with the Confederates coming in. Where I was on Pickett's charge, there's a farmhouse, I think it's a Bryan farmhouse, and that was owned by free African Americans.
Basil Biggs.
Yep.
Basil Biggs, the Pickett's charge, the battle was fought on the black man's farm.
Right, coming across.
Basil Biggs. He came back after the battle.
Right.
And buried all the Confederates for, the federal government paid him 2 cents a body.
Yep. It was a good point. It was a really big deal because you can imagine the health issues with all those bodies out there and to getting them get buried. And a lot of families came back to find the buried bodies and, you know, take them back to the different homes. The national park has a lot of Union soldiers. It was supposedly only been for Union soldiers, because there's several Confederates in there that they kind of missed because there's a whole bunch of unknown soldiers weren't raised. But they mainly kept it for the Union soldiers. So there's, yeah, I mean, it's a whole story. There's the word family talks about some of the slaves right before the battle started were escaping, and they were on their property or a neighbor's property, and they were almost trapped in a swamp. And some of the neighbors went out to help get them away so they could move further north. The words also, like I said, were a lot into the abolition, and they helped slaves escape, go north, and you know, they did a lot of that also. So there's information out there, but yeah, probably you could do a whole book on that. Yes?
Question on Pickett's charge, which I think is a bit of a misnomer because it shouldn't be Pettigrew, Trimble, Pickett charge.
I know why I know why it is.
Yeah.
Pickett had the best
Yes.
marketing.
Management.
He was also Virginia,
Yeah.
which Lee was, but Trimble and Pettigrew also percent large contingents there.
Well, my question is, in your research and opinion, do you get the idea that Lee really wanted that to happen earlier in the day when it actually did?
He wanted to happen, you know, first thing in the
That's what I
morning
thought.
when, the charge on Colts Hill took place, and he thought by that point Chip Stewart would have been in the back. So he thought all three of them were gonna happen at the same time in the morning. But Pickett didn't get his division up.
Yeah.
Chip Stewart was stopped, And for the third day, they tried to take Post Hill and they couldn't do it.
And at that point, wasn't the center not as, strong? or
Well,
stronger?
you know, the problem was, and Lee didn't give specific orders, and I actually took a really good tour with some of the park rangers were talking about that. They likened Pickett's charge to D-Day in Eisenhower. Eisenhower wanted air cover with airplanes. That's why Pickett had the 150. He wanted his flanks secured, Eisenhower. Well, they put two of their best troops on the flanks. And if you're doing a frontal charge, you have to have more men than what's defending because you're gonna lose some. And then when you breach, you need that push from more troops coming through. Something happened when they had that little breach, and we know that they had moved the cannons out of range, so the northern cannons would destroy them. They didn't know where they were, so they weren't available. But I think there were some other pieces missing, including, you know, if they would have breached it and there'd been a whole couple of regiments of Confederates coming up, I think that's probably what it did. Nothing worked right, and what I think the big failure is that Lee just wouldn't adjust his plans. You know, he should have listened to Longstreet to begin with, but, you know, then Lee just had that faith in all of them.
Thank you.
Yes,
Just an anecdote about General Pickett,
yes.
and I've heard, maybe you know if it's true or not, but after the war, when Robert E. Lee was president of Washington College in Lexington, Virginia, Pickett was with a group of former Confederate officers that were visiting Lexington, so the other officers wanted to go pay their respects to General Lee, and General Pickett refused. He said, "That man destroyed my division."
Yeah, where's my division? They're all dead on the field. Yeah, from what I understand, he never talked with Lee after.
When you were saying about some missing pieces, you know, with me, you know, that some other, I believe a lot of it too had to be with Longstreet because he really didn't want to do that attack.
That is a good point. I think so too. You know, if he was a really good officer, even though he didn't believe it, you know, he should have said, how can I save my troops, give them the best chance. And even when they started the artillery, you know, he wouldn't do it. He passed it off for them to start the artillery. So I think you're absolutely right. But when he tried to talk with Lee the night before, Lee didn't want to hear it. This is what they were going to do.
Well, and what you say too with Lee, it was partially, I think, just a little bit of arrogance that he thought he couldn't be defeated.
Well, up to that point, he had.
Yeah.
You know, Stonewall did a lot for him.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And Stonewall died in the previous battle of Gettysburg. And, you know, Lee just had that supreme belief in it.
Well, I honestly believe too that what you were saying, because Longstreet wanted to go around to the right.
Yeah.
So they're right and flank them from the rear. And if Lee would have to do that, that battle would have been totally different.
Maybe, maybe not. When I was doing my book on Pickett's charge, the guy who wrote the foreword is a former military officer, now a military historian and advisor. And I asked him that question.
Yeah.
And he said, nope, been the same battle, different place. Because the North, you know, Meade wanted to keep that line, that hill line, all the way down, so he could have just adjusted it down.
Right.
They'd still have to charge uphill. But who knows?
Yeah, you know, yeah, it's right, yeah.
Wasn't Lee really sick at the time?
People say he was, and I'm not sure if he was sick. People using excuses for him. I'm just, you know, the medical records are pretty unclear, but a lot of people think, and they say, you know, Lee wasn't himself that day, but I'm not sure.
When the Confederates came across the Columbia-Riceville Bridge and they set it on fire and went back.
The Union set it on fire.
Union, I mean, yeah, they were coming across, but where were they headed? Philly, Harrisburg?
Well, they had part of them are up in Harrisburg. They're ready to attack Harrisburg. And I think they were coming across there to get to Lancaster. And they wanted, or they might have come up and reversed at Harrisburg, but they really wanted to get on the other side because I think Harrisburg was the main objective to begin with. Again, they needed a big victory in the north. Harrisburg would have been, I don't think they could have ever taken DC or Philadelphia, but if they could have gotten across there very possible.
Gettysburg was the turning point of the war.
I think so. I mean, they very much. A lot of people say Vicksburg also, but I think Gettysburg. They were lost Gettysburg. I think there have been a lot of things to negotiate a peace from there.
Did you say in your research at Gettysburg that you didn't have access to certain, they wouldn't give you access to certain documents or something?
Oh, there's some documents that are protected, you're not allowed to take photographs of. They let me see it and I have to handwrite it or take notes on my laptop computer. But some of them are and they let you know, you're not allowed to take a photocopy or a camera shot of it. But no, they were always very open what they had. Yeah.
Two things. You didn't find Pickett's report that Lee rejected, did you?
No, I don't think I did.
I'm being.
I
I just often thought it would be, what a find if that actually existed somewhere.
And the only, comment that's in the movie, and I think it's probably pretty close, if not totally accurate. Form up for that, the possible charge. I have no.
And the other thing, and he also said late after the war too, that I think the Yankees had something.
Yes.
Winning the battle there.
Yep.
But I think you alluded to this with Barlow, your relative.
General Barlow's Knoll.
Your relative's regiment in Wheatfield was it the
61st New York.
Yeah.
They're from Westchester County, New York. Father was the village doctor. Whoop, got one more question there. Yes?
Not a question, an anecdote. After the Battle of Gettysburg, the government was buying lead for the war effort. And a lot of the young men in town would go out and find unexploded shells. And what you were supposed to do is pull out the fuse, pour in some water. You could shake the balls out without it going off. A lot of them didn't take the time to do that. They beat them on stones and everything and trying to get the lead out, and a number of them lost hands, fingers.
Well, they only did that once. Get the lead out.
Do you have an idea for another book?
I do. I have a couple books, a couple ideas. True crime. You want to know what true crime is? But then I have another. This is a good group. I'm going to try out an idea. I've been working on a Civil War book, but true crime. I covered some cases as a newspaper reporter. I covered the courthouse, and I wrote true stories about these different cases. If you remember, just about a year ago, there was a criminal that broke out of Chester County. My book will be out at the end of February. It's the same publisher that did this book. And so that one's coming out. That's actually written. I'll tell you about it.
I had the pleasure one time of going down to Charles Smithall's book museum. That's just phenomenal. Phenomenal. I don't know if the daughter's going to open up sometime or not, but it's unbelievable.
Yep. Now, I'll let you be the judge. Tell me if I'm on base or not. Oh, that was a pun. I should keep it. Doubleday. Abner Doubleday. Right. The inventor of baseball, right? No. I'm glad you all know that's not true. Doubleday, again, a little bit like Webb. Staunch American, defend the rights, don't take anything from anybody. Don't let anybody violate our laws or take our property. Second in charge of Fort Sumter. And there was a book that recently came out that I read. It was written about the events leading up to the Civil War. And he talks about Doubleday. Doubleday let everybody be known he is a supporter of Lincoln. They wrote in newspapers, "We catch you, we're going to tar feather you." Just, I know it was an open secret. It wasn't a secret because he didn't tell anybody. When the Star of the West came to relieve and give supplies to the troops there under Anderson in Charleston, one of the Confederate batteries opened it up and chased them away. This was before they were fully, you know, trained, and they had a lot of batteries there in Charleston, and it was pretty much amateurs on it. And what Doubleday wanted to do is fire back now. We can't let anybody, you know, do that to our property and our ships. Anderson, his superior, good northern soldier, everything I worry about, but he grew up in the South, said, no, I don't have any orders. I can't do it. And President Buchanan just wanted out of office before the war started. It was obvious. His secretary sent great supplies to the Union forts in the South because he was ready to switch sides, and he wanted all the ammunition down there. Yep, boy. So, if they would have listened to Doubleday then, and I know I'm coming back to Gettysburg, and would have fired it, I don't think it would have stopped the Civil War. But it might have given some of those states pause to think about it, because they had, you know, South Carolina's about to know it's seceded that way. Say, whoops, these guys are serious. They're going to defend. Do we really want to get into a shooting war with the North? Up to that point, you know, they could do anything they want, because Buchanan's administration wasn't doing anything. So if they actually listened to Doubleday, would that have given some of the states to say, well, maybe we don't, or slowed it down? I think it's possible, because up to that point, you know, you can have whatever you want down here. Now, let's get to Gettysburg. Leading into Gettysburg, Doubleday was in the First Corps. We know about General Reynolds, second in charge. Doubleday and Meade had some kind of squabble at Fredericksburg, pointing of fingers, a lot of politics, army politics going on. They weren't the best of friends. He gets up that first morning. Reynolds is shot and killed, and Doubleday takes over. By all accounts, he did a great job getting everybody together, holding them in there, trying to hold them off as the Union troops come up. Eventually, him and everybody else pushed through the field and went up to Seminary Ridge. And he was one of the first ones to say, that's where we should be. There was one part of that First Corps that kind of ran from the field, went into town, then came back. But everybody else really did everything they could, high marks. Well, one of the Union officers saw that one group go down, didn't see him come back, reported back to me, that whole First Corps left the field and fled, and there were a bunch of cowards. Not true, but he's up there fighting. He gets back, and he, by rank and everything else, Doubleday should have been in charge of the First Corps. And Meade said no. He gave it to somebody else. Slocum, I think, if I remember.
John Newton.
Newton, that's right. Newton was first. Slocum had something to do with this? Was Slocum the one that reported it? Or was Newton?
Buford had.
No, it wasn't Buford.
Buford said there was no controlling the force.
Right.
No controlling hand.
Right. You know, it was that back and forth in the morning because there wasn't enough Union troops that were coming over. But by all accounts, Doubleday should really have been in charge. Now, if you go to the end of Pickett's charge, Meade was severely criticized by everybody. Hancock, President Lincoln, for not pursuing immediately after Pickett's loss. And that's what Doubleday said too. If he was a corps commander, would his presence along with Hancock and the other would maybe change Meade's mind? Because he had a fresh corps that hadn't been used, and they very well could have caught Lee on this before he got away. So I'm thinking, you know, like Doubleday unheeded, two issues that could really change the war. What do you think?
Well, thank you.
And my cousin was my American government teacher in high school.
he never knew about this stuff. He's 89, he lives in Glenwood.
And, you know, so many people don't know about Lafayette.
It's amazing. It was just such a great thing when you did it all together.
Thank you. The foreword was by the officer of the American Friends, and I just thought what he wrote was. Make it out to you?
Yeah, sure. Your name? Rebecca, R-E-B-E-C-C-A. Thank you so much. Yeah, my half brother, he went to school at Valley Forge Military.